Hello class, my name is Peter Saumalo. My research project is on the colonization of the Hawaiian Islands from 1820 to 1898. The general argument I make in my paper is that this colonization was made possible from the influence of white missionaries who arrived in the islands from Massachusetts in 1820. Upon their arrival, they quickly made relationships with local chieftains, specifically the monarchy. Hawaiian upper society was specifically susceptible to Christianity, so they formed very strong relationships really quickly. Ultimately, there are just a few dates that kind of make up the cornerstones of my paper. 1820, when the missionaries arrived, that's the beginning of their influence. The Great Mahele land reforms from 1846 to 1855 changed Hawaiian relationships of land ownership from more collectivist to private ownership. The Great Mahele land reforms introduced ideas of private land ownership, and they also allowed, for the first time in Hawaiian history, the sale of land to non-Hawaiians. So foreign business interests or these white missionaries could buy land. Specifically, white missionaries were able to buy land very cheaply from the Hawaiian government because of the connections made early on through Christianity. Now, the next one would be the Treaty of Reciprocity in 1876. This has mostly to do with the sugar trade, which, because of the Great Mahele land reforms, were largely owned by white business interests, white settlers. In 1876, they signed this treaty with the United States that made the sugar industry or the sugar import industry much more profitable, but in the process made the Hawaiian economy almost completely dependent on the United States. This dependency would ultimately lead to our next cornerstone, which was the Bayonet Constitution of 1887. It's called the Bayonet Constitution because a group of American business interests living in Hawaii, generally white upper class folks living in Hawaii, stormed the king's chambers and held him hostage and forced him to sign this constitution. This constitution did two main things. The first was it disenfranchised a large portion of Native Hawaiian society by instituting land-owning requirements for voting, and it also stripped the monarchy of most of its power, turning it into mostly a ceremonial position. Now, this change in power dynamic is what would ultimately lead to the coup of 1893, which is our last main pillar. Queen Liliuokalani attempted to reclaim some sovereignty that was present before 1887, and American business interests took this as tyranny. They recruited the help of a U.S. naval ship, which was docked in Pearl Harbor, and the Marines on there disembarked and said they were there to protect the lives and property of American citizens. This intimidation tactic ultimately worked, and Queen Liliuokalani decided not to press any sort of violent resistance, ultimately stepping down from her position of power. Now, once the Queen stepped down, the Republic of Hawaii was formed. This was kind of a provisional government, and it was led by a man named Sanford Dole, who was, or eventually ended up being the first governor of Hawaii after annexation. And he was also a descendant of some of the original missionaries to arrive in Hawaii. Also, fun fact, his first cousin started the Hawaiian Fruit Company, which is now known as the Dole Fruit Company, which still operates in Hawaii to this day. Now, the Republic of Hawaii would last about 5 years until official U.S. annexation in 1898. This annexation was a long time coming, but happened in large part because of the Spanish-American War and the strategic value that Hawaii presented to the United States. Because of its location in the Pacific, it created a gateway for American naval power in the region, specifically with Pearl Harbor, as it was the most ideal naval harbor in the entire Pacific, pretty much. It's a deep water harbor, easily defendable, and it was huge. So the U.S. could store their entire fleet there, as we would later see in World War II. The main sources I used for this, especially for probably my primary sources, were the writings of Liliuokalani. She was very active in the resistance to the annexation. She wrote tons of letters to Congress. She wrote a book. I used a lot of her writings through my paper as kind of a symbol of Hawaiian resistance and Hawaiian sovereignty. She really became the voice of the Hawaiian diaspora following annexation. I also used American writings from the time, specifically from the North American Review, which is one of the oldest magazine publications in the United States. They wrote about a lot of cultural issues with the United States, and there were several articles regarding the annexation of Hawaii and the effect that that would have on American culture. Now, one of the challenges I faced in my research is that because of my goal, because of my thesis, I wanted to connect the religious influence to the business influence, whereas a lot of the secondary sources I found focused on one or the other. So a lot of those connections I had to kind of make on my own. And as far as primary sources go, Queen Liliuokalani, she was a devout Christian herself, and so there was a challenge in parsing out or in finding the connection there, because that's not something she would be interested in pointing out, not really a part of her analysis of the situation. Now, as a cool discovery that I made, something that enlightened me a little bit, was in my research, I learned a lot more about how the movements for Hawaiian sovereignty continue to this day. Most recently, with the Mauna Kea protests, there is a push to build a new observatory there. Native Hawaiians, that is a sacred site for Native Hawaiians, and so the protests around the building of this site really highlights the need for sovereignty among the Hawaiian people, the desire for independence. Another protest that has been going on lately is against Mark Zuckerberg, who has been buying up large tracts of Hawaiian land. This is all significant in part because of the way Hawaii was annexed. Native Hawaiians don't get the same recognition that other Native American groups get. Therefore, they don't have the same rights, they don't have the same negotiation power, and they are treated differently than other groups, and the lack of rights is part of what leads to people like Mark Zuckerberg being able to take advantage of the situation. Now, as for how my research has helped me understand imperialism and colonialism, it has really showed, or really, I feel like the case of Hawaii is a really good example of how soft power, soft influence will eventually translate to hard imperialism. So when the missionaries arrive, they make connections with leadership, and this influence just continued to grow and grow and grow, and this settler population kept demanding more and more and more influence until eventually overthrowing the monarchy. Ultimately, I really enjoyed researching this project despite the challenges. I myself am part Polynesian. I have family throughout the islands, and it has given me a new perspective on kind of this aspect of my family history, and I look forward to listening to all of your projects. Thank you.